Hi everyone, Mason Stevenson, editorial manager of the Corporate Learning Network. I have a new video and interview coming at you. So learning has taken on a new kind of room. Whether it's in the classroom or the boardroom, the crisis of COVID-19 has disrupted traditional learning delivery and methods, forcing L&D teams and educators to rethink learning and empower students to take learning into their own hands. So what does emergency immersion in teaching and training look like in the current environment, and how are learners adapting to it? We get a sneak peek into the session of Selena Griffith, Senior Lecturer of Design, Innovation, Entrepreneurship at UNSW Art Design at Online and E-Learning Coronavirus 2020. That's the event. She'll share 10 steps to taking a human-centered approach to empower students and develop engaged online learning communities in the COVID-19 age and beyond. So Selena is joining us here today. Selena, fantastic to have you. A little bit of a time difference. I'm in the US and you're in Australia, so we're like 14 hours apart, so that's a little different.
It's a miracle of modern technology, Mason.
Exactly, and in our current environment, it's become pretty standard. So thank you for taking the time to join us. I know it's the morning time there. You're probably just starting your work day. For me, the day's been over with for a few hours, but let's hang out and let's talk some learning. So the first question to kind of start us off here, what are some of the benefits and also the challenges that come along with digital learning?
Well, I'll start with benefits. And I've been chatting a lot in the last few weeks with my students about this. I've been teaching predominantly online for the last 4 years and just come back teaching face-to-face, and then was hit with 3 weeks in, let's go online. And I was like, yay, I love online teaching. So the benefits is the way that you can give students the opportunity to take a self-paced, self-service approach to learning. And that's really great because you can give them extension exercises if they've really got it, and you can give them supplementary exercises if they need to work on things that they're getting stuck with. So it's really great for autonomous learners and for supporting students if you're on the go and you can identify who needs what. It's fantastic for shy students because it gives them the opportunity to create in a non-confronting environment responses when they wouldn't normally, respond in a social face-to-face class situation. And I'm finding it's really fantastic for our non-native language speakers who might have English as a second language in our case, because it allows them space to synthesize the discussions and create really good responses. So they're thriving in this context. And from an instructor perspective, I find that it ironically allows me to get to know my students really well, and also allows me to tailor specifically to individual needs a lot better than I can in a classroom. Some of the challenges, it is a special skill set to be able to design for continuous engagement and inclusion. And if you don't get that engagement early, you can lose your students, and it's very hard to regain them once that happens.
Right.
There's the challenge of having a different context in which to create a learning community, but it's just a different context, and you can create really good, well-bonded learning communities online. And we really need to work out how to give our students and participants in our online courses agency. So some level of control about how they engage, because they do that in a face-to-face way. So how can we give it to them in an online way without being too homogenous? And then, we all understand that we're inherently social learners. So how do we can't replicate because it's a different context, but how do we provide alternatives to social learning in an online environment? So that's my benefits and challenges.
So let's talk about the hallmarks of a successful corporate learning culture. What are some of the benefits and challenges of creating one?
Well, I think there needs to be acknowledgement and reward for people who engage in any program. So if you can build in some kind of badging or just a conversation around, oh wow, so and so has done this, it's obviously worked, or isn't it wonderful that we've been able to apply this learning in this context. So there needs to be a continual overt discussion around the benefits of learning in a corporate culture, which is a little bit different from an institutional education culture, because we are here to teach and research or learn and research, whereas in other organizations the learning has a different context. But all learning needs to be inclusive and needs to be engaging. So how do we make sure everyone can access it that needs it, and that they feel that's accessible to them, and that they can navigate the system in which to access the online learning? And it needs to be flexible so people can engage with it when they need it and as they need it. And I'm currently working on a very innovative new program at a new engineering program in London, and our entire program is self-service online nodes which come together to become modules, which come together to become your course, and you self-assess which ones you need to do. And I think in a institutional learning context that's not an education institute, that would be a fantastic option for assessing whether you need to do this and that completed this, and it's a development milestone, so there's some kind of celebration, and that we really understand who our audience is, and that we cater to their needs, that we're not too patronizing, and that we take a human-centered design approach in developing the content. So we talk to people about how they like to learn, what they need to learn, what works best for them, and probably engage in some areas of co-design. So you have your pedagogical experts and your content experts, but the real experts on how to learn are the learners, and you need to learn to understand what their needs are. And it changes from industry and discipline, and every team that's developing content needs to understand who their user is at the end of the day.
Right. So educators and training teams, they have a little bit of a balancing act that they
Yeah.
have to kind of perform. And we're talking about synchronous and asynchronous learning. So how can they balance that to ensure practical learning outcomes are sustained online?
Well, ask a cohort what they like to do on their own, and that becomes your asynchronous. And ask them what they learn better together, and that becomes your synchronous. And I find that whilst I say to everyone, all your lectures are asynchronous, I have a synchronous time every week when I record them. So if anyone likes a live lecture, they can come in and watch that lecture whilst it's being recorded. Very few students take us up on that, but there are a number that do. And what they do for me is that I have a question and sort of chat open at the time, and Ray raised questions that the others would probably raise. So it allows me to respond to a student audience in rounding out the information that I'm delivering in that lecture. That wouldn't happen if I did a pre-prepared, isolated lecture. I would not put anything in a synchronous context that can't be delivered asynchronously, because students get frustrated if they think that they could be doing something better with their time. And I really focus in the synchronous components of a course on making sure that I've got people interacting with each other and doing activities that are social learning activities, like having debates, having discussions, asking questions, and doing show and tell. And a lot of the time in the synchronous components of my courses, I hand over the controls to the students and say, look, you've now got moderator access to everything in this program, and you are taking classes. So I do a little bit of peer learning. But I also, at the very beginning of my courses, have 4 questions that I ask every cohort. So I ask everyone to make a little video for a minute about who they are, to introduce them to everyone else. And that means that they all know that they're humans. I ask them to make sure that they all have a photo of them as their avatar, so that it's not their dog or their goldfish or their favorite comic hero. And that helps them all feel, again, that that's a group of people that they're learning with. And then I ask them to answer these 4 questions. I ask them, why are you doing this course? What do you want to get out of it? What's your learning preferences, and what kind of student are you? And that helps me test the cohort every semester, because every cohort is different.
Right.
And then that allows me to I always have a bit of flexibility, or what I call reactionary space in my course design every semester in the delivery, so that I can sort of tweak it to match the needs of that cohort. So again, that's a bit of co-design or human-centered design in the delivery.
Yeah, and that's super important. Those are great questions. I feel like being able to get some of those answers back, and then, like you said, kind of shape that course to fit those needs. That's super important. So in terms of, the current environment that we're in, we've always kind of talked about learners having to kind of take the power here for their learning. So how can institutions empower learners to take that learning into their own hands?
Yeah, learners are inherently motivated, particularly in the tertiary and the professional contexts. So I think having peer-led activities where different students are asked to create opportunities. So for example, I have readings every week. If I said to everyone, have you done your readings? They'd all mumble a bit. And some have and some haven't. But if I give a group of students every week a challenge to design an activity to engage their peers about the content of that reading, I have one group of students that have really thought about it, and the other students know that they're going to be in that boat later on. So they pay attention to who's doing what. It gets a little bit competitive in a good way, and I learn a whole lot of new ways of delivering sort of content in the context of how those students think. And we're having a whole cohort discussion around our readings, because it's peer-led activities. If I see gaps, I fill them, but generally the students do an excellent job in teaching each other, and that naturally happens in a tutorial context anyway. So you can replicate that online. I like to have sort of extension content available for those who are really fascinated about something. So here's what you really need to know, which is the basics, and here's a little bit of an extension if you're interested, and then go see these guys, or read this book, or watch this video for a much deeper version of it. And it's really interesting to look at the back-end stats of your learning and teaching platforms to see when and who engages in this content. And you'd be surprised at how many students will have a specific interest in the topic area, one of the topic areas you're teaching, and they'll go right down that rabbit hole. And I also have a little area every week in my forums where students can post additional material that they've found interesting that relates to what we're doing, and news media items that might be related to areas that we're covering. And I find that they always really react well to having a space where they can share extra information they've found. And if you've got an engaged sort of couple of students on an area, they might have a discussion about it. And we've got to remember that we have the learners and the leaders and the lurkers in there. So the lurkers might be drawn in to become, part of the active discussion at that moment if it's particularly of interest to them. So it's just like social media. They're generating their own content, but it's good because that's what you'd be wanting them to do in a normal learning context anyway. But whenever I do these things, one of the key things I've learned is to keep all the tech simple that the students are using, minimize the different applications that you're expecting them to engage with. And, think of a computer game. When you're delivering content, in the beginning of a game, it's easy, and then it gets more complex and difficult as you progress through the stages. And that's how you should plan your learning in an online context as well. And the deeper it gets, the more engaging it gets, but you don't want to make it so hard that people can't progress through to the next level.
Off of that, I want to take a little bit of a jump into something here. So, what are the key steps to consider when focusing on community building and engagement to maximize outcome success? You kind of talked a little bit about it. So let's kind of go a little deeper maybe.
Yeah, if you think of a traditional learning environment, there's a broader cohort, so they might all come together in a large group once a week. And then you have a tutorial group, which is a smaller component of that cohort. and each one of them is individually led through learning. And then they might break down into teams for particular activities, and then there's how individuals want to engage. So you need to provide safe, accessible online alternative spaces for all of this to occur. It's natural. So I said before, we're social learners, and social interactions happen at different levels of density, complexity, and if you can provide that. So I found that most learning technologies, now my very first ever collaborative online teaching was done through Facebook, the first year that Facebook was launched. It's a long time ago. And it was and it was between students here in Sydney and a bunch of students in London. And it was the only platform that I could find that was asynchronous, where students could leave information for each other. They could have chats together, and they could also share images. That was free. And it's taken a lot of time for actual learning management software to have this capability. And we have that now. So our students are digital natives. They're used to being social, very used to being social online anyway. Look at what's happening in the different forms of media that they're currently digesting. And then how do you do that within the learning management system that you're working with? And that's important to sort of translate that out so it works. And sometimes I just say to my students, well, that team and individual stuff, and sometimes the tutorial stuff, they can take elsewhere into another platform I don't need to be involved with, as long as that collaborative online stuff is happening that would normally happen in a face-to-face content. So if they go and use WhatsApp or Twitter or whatever they feel is like the best alternative for them as a group. Some might use Trello if they're doing a project that they're collaborating on. Whatever they feel most comfortable in, let them use that. And you don't have to be in there as long as they're doing it. So I start off a space for them to meet, introduce and share whatever private emails they want to use and negotiate their collaboration platforms, but give flexibility for this to happen elsewhere if it's appropriate.
Yeah, that personalization is super important. From a learning perspective, even, thinking back on my own personal learning at all stages of my life, that ability to really take that and turn it into something that I can understand and translate it in a way where my brain functions properly, or at least the way it should, function to go forward.
And one of the things I really love is, I might pop back into a group that was sort of established 10, 15 years ago on some alternative platform, and they're still in there talking to each other.
Great.
And that's the kind of like they probably they may never have done that in a face-to-face context. They might have just met in a tute and never reconnected, but they keep in touch. And that's beautiful. That's lifelong learning.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So, I think it's very easy for us right now to heavily focus on, COVID-19 and really think in context of what it's doing. And one thing that I really wanted to do with this conversation is I didn't want to focus too much on it, but we do have to kind of bring it into the mix a little bit, because it's impacting everything we're doing. So my next couple of questions really take that into context. So what impact, and we've kind of been talking about technology already, so what impact do you think this immersion into online or distance learning by institutions might have on confidence in technology-enabled learning?
Oh, I'm gonna hit you with this from three perspectives, because I'm having three views of this at the moment. So there's me as a student. So I've actually decided over this period to do a couple of online courses in stuff that I've been interested in, and completely unrelated to my discipline. And I've had one fantastic experience and one horrific one. And I was reflecting on this question in the light of that. The really good experiences led me to think, wow, this is such a great way to learn. But if I hadn't had that experience and I'd had the other experience, which has just been a disaster, the content wasn't great. They're constantly sending me reminders that I've missed my course when I've actually attended. So obviously the software is not lining up its data correctly. And it's just irritated me. And it's a 10 module thing. I did 2 modules and I thought, I can't be bothered any further. I don't want to be engaged with these guys. And then I decided to unenroll, and I had to go through 16 clicks to unenroll. It only took me 1 click to enroll. And then I got a series of emotional emails telling me that I'm not investing in my future, and that my future won't be as good. And I thought, wow, this is such aggressive marketing. And it was not a great experience. And I would never recommend this company to anyone else. But the good experience allowed me the flexibility to do what I needed when I wanted to do it. And if I had a 3-hour block and I could do 3 modules at the same time, I could do it. I didn't have to wait. Yeah, that really helped. And I had the ability to have a chat room and talk to my peers that were learning, and I could do the social learning bit as well. So that was a great experience. And I would see myself as a digital native because I'm constantly using and teaching and communicating in digital platforms. I look at my 2 students, my 2 kids who I've got at home learning. I have a 13-year-old. He's in his first year of high school. He gets up at 9 o'clock. He gets up at 10 to 9, has breakfast, and he's sitting down at the desk at 9 o'clock, and he works through in order every one of his classes for the day. All of the materials there for asynchronous learning, but he likes the rigor of that synchronous learning. So he actually just manipulates all of his asynchronous learning into a synchronous experience. He has a race with one of his friends. They're on the mobile phone whilst they're on the computer, chatting through all of their work, getting through it as fast as possible. So he obviously needs that social learning context, with a peer that's engaged in the same material, and they have banter around how badly worded the questions are. So, example, they had a multiple choice question the other day. What size is a bee? It gave a whole series of sizes. They managed to find a species of bee that fits every size. So answered all measurements correct, and then gave the bee species. I think their poor maths teacher will now have to go and talk to the biology teacher. But so that, there's that type of learner. And then there's my 15-year-old and her best friend who was staying with us over this period, and they I go into their room all day, they're still in their pajamas and they're on their phones. And I thought, they're not getting through any of the work. And then the school started sending me reports, and they're getting through all their work. They're just doing it on their phones rather than their laptops. And in the middle of that, they're doing all their social media as well, and taking selfies of them learning, and sharing that with their friends. So there's 3 different learning styles in our family there, and it's all having to be catered to in this online context with different technologies, and different institutions are taking different ways of doing it. But what I really think has been interesting to watch from the high school perspective of my 2 children is how quickly their staff have come up to speed with this technology. And I was reflecting on why are the staff doing such, I felt compelled every week to write to them and say, this is awesome. I've really loved what you've done for my kids this week. And I think it's because the staff are all really young at their school, and they are digital natives, and they're used to using this, and they have been chomping at the bit for the opportunity to build digital into their learning. And I don't think they're going to change that when they go back to school. I was having a chat with the principal, and he's said it's been fantastic. He's wanted to push more digital, and it's going to give the kids at school more flexibility. I have other friends who've shown me what they're getting from school. They've got much older staff at their schools, who haven't been able to embrace that. And so they're struggling coming up to speed with using their technology. And I think that's what we've seen at our university as well. So I have colleagues that I've worked with for years who've not taken on digital technologies as quickly as others, and haven't needed to because of the content they're teaching. So it's been quite a struggle for them, and they've had to have a lot of help to reimagine how their courses might look online. And one of the challenges I think all institutions face is that there are not enough pedagogical online learning design experts out there to help the number of people that need to be brought up to speed this fast. But most institutions globally were already on this track and have a lot of course and content online and a lot of experience in this, and have been able to deploy assets around the institutions to cope with it. So what do I think about the confidence? I think we're all going to have a lot more interest in how this can be used, and a lot of more confidence, examples to build our confidence on how it will be. But I don't think all of us have had that experience. And I think there's a lot of data coming out that it's also very, very physically and mentally different. It's exhausting learning and working online. We're in different postures. We're not breathing as well. We're looking at projected light rather than reflected light. That exhausts our brains. So we can't have the expectations of the lengthy engagements that we have in a face-to-face context, which we're physically and biologically adapted to. This is a very artificial environment, a very different way to learn. And I don't think that this technology is be all and end all, and particularly in the way that you cannot replace learning in labs and practical classes and studio-based learning with online, but you can augment. And I think that's the exciting bit. That's where my confidence, I think we're going to have much better augmented education, and the notion of blended. I have an issue with blended learning in its very structured approach, because I don't think we should say to students, we want you to learn all this online and we're going to test you every week whether or not you've learned it or done it, because that's just it's the carrot and the stick approach. What we really want is an adaptation response rather than a I have to do this or I'll get smacked. And that comes through a love of learning. So we need to inspire this love of learning and engaging with whatever technology it means to learn through.
Yeah, I have two children as well. Mine are younger. Mine are in, my oldest is in third grade and my youngest is in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
So, the content is different, and they're at different stages. My youngest daughter is learning to read. Now she has done pretty well so far, before this kind of situation happened. So she was in a good place to move forward with it. But I have to admit, there was some concern on my end as a parent, thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not a teacher by trade. Their mother is not a teacher by trade. Thank goodness our teachers have done so well with them beforehand, to kind of prepare them for this. And we experienced some struggles as well. Here in Florida, where we are located, we do have a virtual school. It's not widely used, but they've had to thrust it forward now with the situation. They were kind of developing these things, but it took a good couple of weeks to really get the wheels turning, so folks kind of knew what was going on. And I do share your opinion. The teachers that my children have are both are younger teachers, and they are digital natives, and they were in a good place to kind of push forward with some of this. So it was a little slow on the uptake, but then they got rolling. And both of my children learn different ways. My oldest daughter is much like your high school student, just likes to power through it and get it done. My younger daughter, not so much. She's a little bit loosey-goosey, as it were, but she's getting
it's okay.
right. But she's getting it done, and it's just like you said. It's like, oh my gosh, are they actually doing it? And then you get the reports from the teachers, like, yeah, she's doing fine. She's right where she needs to be. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there, and it's very different to be on this side of it. And I think there will be a lot of people that want to continue this route or find some way of creating a hybrid situation. I think my oldest daughter would thrive in this type of environment. My youngest daughter, not so much. And I think that's just because of her age, not because she can't do it at some point, but she would adapt to it if it became permanent, if you will. But I think there are a lot of things that, like you said, you can't necessarily recreate one-to-one. You can adapt it, you can augment it, but you're not going to be able to create it one-to-one. So I think that's kind of
I think we need to acknowledge that the current notion of teaching as we have it is only 250 years old. And teaching, we are all inherently teachers. We constantly we learn from observation and making error. And our current learning is very artificial in the context of how we would naturally learn as a species. And in fact, we discuss a lot the importance of haptic and interactive and what we call authentic learning, or learning by doing. And I think if we look at augmented learning models, we could still have a lot of that learning by doing, and then the reflection and the reflective practices where we synthesize that learning and become self-critical and understand what we could do better. And one of the things in our current sort of, particularly pre-university education, is to reward correctness, which creates this artificial fear of the natural learning, which is through reflecting on error and modifying behaviour. And I'm very interested in, particularly because I do innovation, entrepreneurship. Failing is a huge part of how you learn in this context. And
Yeah.
it's been a big cultural shift for me to explain to my students that if your project fails and you reflect on it appropriately, you are going to be just as successful as a student whose project doesn't fail. And reflects on it appropriately. And in fact, if that student's project doesn't fail and they don't reflect on it and learn from it, then you've had a better experience by failing. And so, if we could remove some of this artificial need to constantly be correct and rather reward knowledge acquisition through natural learning, which is through failure learning, the buzzword, I think that could be great. And I'm trying to think about new ways of embedding that into my online programming. And it's very easy to do with chat groups and forums, because students can, one of the things I get all the time is students do their tutorial activities every week and peer review each other's work. They're learning to constantly, constructively, critically reflect on theirs and other people's work. And it has developed in my classes much higher quality outputs at the end than I do getting out of a face-to-face class, because they're seeing physically every week what each other are producing and learning from each other as much as they are learning from me. And I'm learning from them. It's a much better learning exchange in the context of what I'm teaching.
I'm always scared about misquoting something, so I'm going to try my best.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's a real thing. I don't know that I'll quote it exactly correct. I think it was somebody asked Thomas Edison why it took him so long to create the light bulb, and he said it didn't. Let's see, I want to make sure I get this right. He said, I learned 100 ways how not to create a light bulb.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's very much along those lines.
Yeah.
I certainly agree with you. I did an interview once talking about virtual reality and learning through virtual reality and simulation. And one question that I asked was about that. Do you set them up for failure? Do you set a Kobayashi Maru situation so they can experience that? And they were like, that's a good idea, but no, we don't do that. It's like, ideally, yeah, it would be great, but that's not necessarily what we're trying to accomplish, which makes sense. But that created a discussion about how important failure is and what you do learn from that.
Yeah.
So my last question was, is what do you think the future of teaching will look like? We've actually been talking about that, so I don't want to ask you again, but is there anything that maybe you left out that we didn't touch on that you feel like is relevant?
Look, I'm going to give you that. I'm going to probably misquote someone too. The future is already out there. It's not evenly distributed. So what does the future look? The future of learning and teaching is not going to change. It's not going to. It's always evolving. It's not going to change too fast. All this COVID-19 stuff, we already had all this in place. We already had this technology. It's not a huge global shift. What it is, it's an adaptation to using other technology that we have already been using. We're just using it more. Our every cohort's different, so our teaching practice should be evolving towards their needs anyway. And technology and the way we use it and our practice as professionals is always changing, and we always respond to that in evolving our teaching practice. What I do think we're seeing now, and I'm hoping that we'll keep, is that this collaboration is really key. So we need to learn now not to collaborate with our learners and to have a collaborative relationship between the learners and teachers. And that's not always the case. I think that's what we're seeing now, is that this is being pushed. So that's the big shift I see. And the integration of appropriate technology. So not using online for the sake of online, but using it when it's most appropriate. I think we're going to, not just in education, but every aspect of our life, reimagine the use of space for working in. And so that will change some of the ways that we teach. We've learnt that it's very successful to now transcend borders in delivery of education. And I'm quite excited about that. I see that we've now got an acceleration towards shared content. And yeah, there's groups of academics globally who have a spreadsheet that we're sharing, and we're saying, look, you know, who's happy to talk into someone else's class? So I would normally get a guest lecturer from a colleague at my institution. Now I can get a guest lecturer from a colleague in Ireland or America or Africa. You know, this is we're so excited that we can now share content more readily and bring more people in. And I think we're going to have this a much more collegiate approach to continual iterative improvement of education through this experience. So I think COVID's brought a lot of challenges, but it's opened a lot of doors of opportunity. I suppose that comes back to that initial question you asked: what are the opportunities? What are the challenges? You know, there's always challenges in education. There's always something going on, but how do we make sure long term that everyone has access to this? And I think, you know, a lot of the conversations here in Australia is, you know, a lot of our kids are going to school because they don't have access to technology at home. About 10% of kids, or internet at home. And we're big, and so we've been teaching remotely very successfully with our School of the Air for decades. Where entire curriculums are delivered online. But that's different because you get a package with all the resources you need, and mum leads the learning at home, and mum's trained to help do that. So these are kids in remote stations. Parents aren't in that position to do that in the context of COVID. And I think I keep hearing people say, "Where I'm teaching, I'm homeschooling." You're not homeschooling. You're just supervising kids doing guided activities led by real professionals. So we're no one's being asked to be experts at home right now. No one's going to be perfect. But what you are getting is an insight into what other people are helping your children learn. And I'm loving that experience. So maybe there's more transparency in education in the future as well. Yeah. Might make parents less hovery, maybe.
Some, maybe not all.
Make some more hovery, but yeah, I just think that the more collaborative education context, more learning, more teaching, shared. There's a lot of sharing of practice at the moment, more active sharing of practice than I've ever seen, and I just hope that continues.
Agreed. This is why I like these interviews, because I feel like I'm walking away with something, and even what's interesting is that, you know, before coming into this interview, you know, our discussions have been primarily through email, like not knowing anything about you, not knowing you were a parent, not knowing you had children, all of those types of things. And so I'm not just walking away with information, you know, that our readers are going to hopefully walk away with. I'm also walking away with information as a parent. I never would have thought about this idea of, I mean, I've never really thought about this as homeschooling my kids. I've never thought about it that way. But when you say it and you put it in context, it's like, wow, that kind of makes sense to me. So Selena Griffith with UNSW Art and Design. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and teaching me something. I know everybody else is going to learn something as well. So I hope you had fun.
I did. Thank you. And I hope everyone enjoys this and gets to see the talk in the conference.